Hello, so welcome to part 17 of toxin sequestration theory. This is my new theory of cancer, and interestingly, it's now my new theory of obesity as well. In my last video, part 16, I cast obesity as being very similar to cancer, and now I'm saying that these are two sides of the same coin, and we'll get into this more. But let's just recap. So, toxin sequestration theory is the idea that the body builds cancer tumors on purpose in order to sequester, store, and process toxins. That's why so many toxins have been associated with cancer. These are things that everyone's familiar with. Everyone knows that cigarette smoke, drinking alcohol, these cause cancer. Everyone knows that, asbestos and toxic metals, heavy metals, those drive cancer as well. There's a long list of toxins that everyone is familiar with that drive cancer. And I'm saying, well, that's not an accident. It's because cancer stores toxins. That's its job. The body intentionally builds cancer tumors to do that job. And so we can think of cancer tissue as extra tissue the body builds in order to sequester toxins away from the healthy tissue to protect the healthy tissue. Now, what's fascinating is that what's another situation where the body builds extra tissue? Obesity, right? The body builds fat tissue. And, normally the way people think about fat tissue is that they say, oh, well, you just had too much good nutrition. You just ate too much food and your body wants to store up that energy for the winter, because you're going to hibernate for the winter and the body needs that extra energy to store it, right? So they view everything from the lens of energy. But I'm arguing that we should be viewing things from the lens of toxicity and toxins. And the body does not build extra tissue by accident. It does it for a reason. And I'm saying that, obesity and cancer are the two cases where the body builds extra tissue. And that looks really interesting. And we should be asking just very simple, naive questions like, hey, is there a connection between obesity and cancer? Because they're both the body building extra tissue. And, I'm saying that toxic overload is the modern epidemic that we face. Toxic overload is the epidemic. That is the problem that we are facing today. And sure enough, obesity rates are rising and cancer rates are rising. It's not an accident. And I'm saying that it's because of toxic overload, and the body builds extra tissue not necessarily because it's really wanting to has some extra energy and store that energy up for the winter. It's because it has toxic overload and it needs somewhere to put the toxins. Okay, it needs extra tissue storage space to store those toxins somewhere. And this is fascinating because it allows us to think of obesity and cancer as sequential strategies on a spectrum to address the same underlying root issue, which is toxicity. And I think of obesity as kind of step one, or tier one in my tiered view. So in my previous video, I talked about how tier one of dealing with toxicity is adding fat tissue, and that includes obesity as well as visceral fat, things like fatty liver, where your organs get enveloped in fat. And I'm saying that that's kind of the body's first attempt to store toxins. And when that kind of fails, and that's not enough, then it can go to the next tier, which is building a cancer tumor. And then when that fails, it can go to the next tier, tier 3, which is metastasis and cachexia. And those are the most late stage interventions that the body takes. So we don't have to think of obesity as being completely unrelated to cancer. It's actually just say a precursor to cancer. And some people ask the question, why is it that skinny people do still get cancer? And I'll address that more in my video. But in fact, obesity is a protective measure that the body takes in order to store toxins. And if you fight that measure, and people sometimes do fight that, right? So, and I'll get into this, basically, the common ways that people fight obesity is with pharmaceutical drugs, GLP-1s, right? Intense exercise, like we all know that famous TV show called The Biggest Loser, where they forced obese people to exercise very intensely to reduce their fat tissue. And then thirdly, things like extreme fasting or like prolonged fasting or sardine fasting. These are well known to trigger rapid fat loss. So there are aggressive measures that people sometimes take to lose fat. And of course that can cause weight loss, but what's really interesting is that I'll get into how that's not necessarily healthy, because fat tissue stores lipophilic toxins. There are toxins like seed oils, microplastics, forever chemicals, PFAS, as well as heavy metals. So heavy metals are actually lipophilic because they're usually bound to biomolecules. And those four toxins are all stored preferentially inside of fat tissue. They're also stored, of course, inside of cancer tissue as well. And that's because cancer tissue is basically an escalation beyond fat tissue when your body needs even more storage. But anyway, all of those lipophilic toxins are stored preferentially inside of fat tissue. And that means that if you fight fat tissue, if you aggressively fight fat tissue in an unnatural way, in a stressful way, like with GLP-1 drugs or extreme exercise, extreme fasting, sardine fasting, then that means you will be releasing those lipophilic toxins back into your body fluids. They were nicely stored in the fat tissue. The body had them sequestered and they weren't affecting your vital organs. Ultimately, by the way, the body's goal is to protect its vital organs. Its top priority, its number one priority is the heart, the brain, the liver, the kidneys, the pancreas, the lungs. The vital organs are the most important things that the body wants to protect. So it will do whatever it has to do to protect those organs, including building fat tissue. And that means both belly fat as well as visceral fat around your organs. And like I said, in previous videos, I have cast obesity and fat tissue, including visceral fat, as protective adaptations that are defense mechanisms. They are not diseases. So fatty liver disease is not a disease. That's a misnomer to call it a disease. It's a defense mechanism. Obesity is not a disease. It's a defense mechanism. And anyway, the point is, if you fight your body's defense mechanisms, bad things can happen. And aggressive, intense, rapid weight loss can lead to what I call retoxification. Retoxification of the body is whenever the toxins that were nicely sequestered and stored in fat tissue get released back into the body fluids, which means that now the body has to deal with them. Now, who really has to deal with those toxins? Well, it's the liver and the kidneys. Those are your detox organs. And then the liver and the kidneys are like, oh, thanks. Now I have to deal with all these heavy metals and all these, forever chemicals and microplastics and seed oils. And that's not easy. The liver and the kidneys are already super stressed out. They're already under tons of pressure from, the diets that people are eating these days. So, even though the mainstream will tell you, oh, we have an obesity epidemic and you have to fight your obesity, and I'm actually saying that there is danger to rapid fat loss, and retoxification comes with additional risks. So first of all, if you fight your body's tier one strategy, it can escalate to tier two, right? So if you kill off your fat tissue, it can lead to a cancer tumor, right? So rapid weight loss can be a precursor to getting a cancer tumor, because it means that, well, you've emptied your fat storage, and now your body says, well, I need to escalate to tier two, which is a tumor. And it is true, by the way, that there are correlations between, I should say that, there are correlations between obesity and cancer and these things. So this is sort of well known. And you can read my blog post to learn about more about the details of these things. But I have a blog post that's called "The Hidden Danger of Rapid Fat Loss: Why Attacking Fat Can Make You Sicker," and there is evidence to support this retoxification view. And that evidence comes from the fact that whenever people do witness rapid weight loss, they sometimes report symptoms of brain fog, inflammation, fatigue, and hormonal chaos, inflammatory flares, skin breakouts, and so in other words, there are side effects to doing rapid weight loss. And some of these, weight loss strategies are more intense than others. The three, I mentioned these three. Naturally, you could probably guess that the pharmaceutical-based approach with Ozempic and these GLP-1s, that's probably the most extreme, right? Where it can lead to massive toxin release, and it's not surprising that this leads to a horrible number of side effects. It's very well known that these GLP-1s have tons of side effects, and a major fraction of those side effects could be attributed to this mechanism, retoxification, where we are bursting open the fat cells and the lipophilic toxins are getting released back into the system. And so the next one is intense exercise. So I mentioned that this has been kind of glorified on TV shows like The Biggest Loser, where they take people who do have obesity and then they sort of force them to do intense exercise. And the intense exercise is not as bad as, say, doing the pharmaceutical drugs, but nevertheless, it is something to think about. And I have anecdotally heard people tell stories of how when they have switched from, say, like just a normal lifestyle to then a lifestyle of doing intense daily exercise with rapid fat loss, then sometimes those people do end up with, say, a cancer tumor. I have heard stories like this. And then the last one is extreme fasting and sardine fasting. Now, this, of course, those can trigger rapid weight loss. And I wanted to highlight sardine fasting because that was a viral trend that appeared half a year ago. People like Dr. Boz have been promoting this as something people should do. And I was always very skeptical of sardine fasting. It really didn't make too much sense to me because if I had the choice between eating beef and eating sardines, I'm going to go with beef, right? Beef is like the best food on the planet. Why would I not want to go with the best food on the planet? Never mind the taste. Obviously, beef tastes better than sardines. But, just in terms of what I know about what's healthy and nutritious, I always viewed beef as the top food. So it didn't make sense to me that someone, in this case, Dr. Boz, was telling people, stop eating your beef and just do a sardine fast. Well, why don't you do a beef fast? It's called the Lion Diet. I sort of had a hunch that sardine fasting was going to turn out to be a bad idea because it went viral on social media. And anything that goes viral on social media is something you should be heavily distrustful of because the people who control social media don't necessarily have our health in their best interest. And by the way, the carnivore diet and the lion diet have never once gone viral on social media. There's never been a huge viral trend around this diet, which happens to be the optimal diet. So that should tell you something. But sardine fasting did go viral. And, Eric Berg has a video on sardine fasting that has like 5 million views. And Dr. Boz's videos have like, 2 million views on this. So I knew sardine fasting was suspicious before I knew the science behind it. But now I understand the science behind why it causes problems. Paul Saladino recently did a video a couple months ago highlighting how sardines leach BPA from the cans. BPA is a toxin in my theory. It's a xenoestrogen. And and they also have a lot of other lipophilic toxins. And by the way, BPA is a lipophilic toxin. It would get stored inside of fat cells. But also they have the heavy metals. So it's well known that sardines have arsenic. They also have some cadmium and some lead, but they especially have arsenic. And the sardines have the forever chemicals, the PFAS, as well as, microplastics, PCBs, and oxidized lipids from the processing. So like those, they have these highly sensitive polyunsaturated fatty acids, and then when you heat them, those can get damaged, and those can be toxic as well. So anyway, the point is sardines by themselves have lipophilic toxins, which means that, you're going to want to be able to store those things. However, if you combine sardines with fasting empties out your fat storage. And so it's a double whammy where it's like the sardines have lipophilic toxins and the fasting kills your fat cells, which means that now you have nowhere to store the lipophilic toxins that the sardines contain. Not to mention, you're also inducing retoxification. You're emptying out your fat storage because you're in caloric deficit and your body has to have some energy source. And so sardine fasting will have a net result of flooding your body with lipophilic toxins, both from the toxins that were stored in your fat cells as well as the lipophilic toxins in the sardines themselves. And this explains why it was pushed on the masses, because obviously I'm sort of a conspiracy theorist there. But in any case, sardine fasting looks like it's even worse than, say, intense exercise. I mean, intense exercise just basically empties out your fat, whereas the sardine fasting empties out your fat and adds lipophilic toxins to the mix. Okay, so that gives you a sense of some of the things that people do to attack or fight their fat cells. And it's also worth noting that, the body, we have to listen to our body and think about working together with our body. If you're trying to lose weight and you're on, say, a healthy diet, like a carnivore diet or keto diet, and then, and the weight's, gradually coming off, but it's not coming off fast enough to your liking. There may be a reason for that. And there may be a reason because, your body doesn't want to put too much stress on the liver and the kidneys, the detox organs. And so many people have experienced what's called a weight loss stall, a stall in the weight loss where the body kind of puts the brakes on weight loss, even though you're eating a good, healthy diet. And there can be a reason for that. It may be that your detox organs are just not ready yet to handle the lipophilic toxins that get released during weight loss. So, you have to be sensitive to your body, and you don't want to try to attack your fat cells with these aggressive protocols like, prolonged fasting, sardine fasting, intense exercise. The right, approach, in my view, is to just stick with the low toxin diet, which is, keto carnivore, and the fat loss will come off when it comes off and when the body's ready for it. So, all right, that's the basic idea. And, I've dove into this a little bit further because one of the things that people really emphasized sometimes in our keto carnivore community, and especially in the sardine community, is ketone levels. And, some people say that, it's not enough to just do a clean carnivore diet. You have to actually check your ketone levels, right? And so what they'll say is like, yeah, you have to, use a ketone meter, measure ketone levels, and make sure you're in deep ketosis. And they'll try to trick you by saying that, oh, just eating beef might not put you into ketosis. You have to actually eat sardines instead. And this sounded very suspicious to me, but there are people in our community, in the keto carnivore community, who are into this whole ketone level measuring. I'm not one of them because my theory doesn't revolve around ketosis. My theory revolves around toxicity. And I argue that the reason the carnivore diet works so well is that it is the lowest toxin diet. There is no other diet out there that is lower in toxins than the carnivore diet. And in fact, I'm saying that ketosis itself is not particularly relevant to my theory. And my theory is about a holistic theory for all of chronic disease. I'm saying that every single chronic disease, from heart disease to kidney disease to multiple sclerosis, all of these diseases are linked to toxicity. And the reason keto carnivore works so well is just because it reduces toxins. Now, if people are saying things like, oh, you have to abandon your super low toxin beef to eat some more toxic sardines because sardines put you into ketosis better, that's very suspicious to me. So anyway, there are people out there, people like Anthony Chaffee, who is a voice of reason. I highly respect Dr. Chaffee. He's a very smart guy. And he always keeps it simple. He's like, look, I've been on the carnivore diet for years and years, and I've never once checked my ketone levels. That's what he said. He has said that publicly, that he has never checked his ketone levels. And he just doesn't feel the need to because he knows that he's eating a species-appropriate diet. He knows he's eating the optimal human diet. So there's no need to. And in fact, what I'm going to argue is that high ketone levels are actually a warning sign that something is going wrong, that you're basically being too aggressive with your fat loss. And whereas people like Dr. Boz are viewing high ketone levels as a metric for success, they're saying, oh, you finally entered deep ketosis. I'm saying, no, it's a warning sign that you are pushing your fat loss too quickly. And in fact, you are emptying your fat storage too fast for what your body can handle. I'm also saying that there is evidence for this, by the way. You guys have probably heard of the keto flu. This is really interesting. So when people first start a ketogenic diet, they're on like the standard diet, high carb, and then they switch over to a very low carb diet, like the keto diet or carnivore diet. And initially they get they get two things. Number one is they get a spike in ketone levels. It's well established that when you first start the keto diet for the first time, you get a big spike in your ketone levels, and then they settle down back to low levels. And then you'll never see those high ketone levels again after that initial spike. Well, people also can witness a very quick, rapid fat loss whenever they first start the keto carnivore diet. And that corresponds to the high spike in ketone levels. The spike in ketone levels is a sign that you very quickly mobilized the fat that was stored in your fat tissue. And but also there's the keto flu. What is the keto flu? Well, we can explain the keto flu as retoxification of the body, where the fat, the lipophilic toxins that were stored in the fat get mobilized and now re-released into the body fluids, and that causes flu-like symptoms. Things like fatigue, things like insomnia, or basically brain fog, all kinds of inflammation. And so the keto flu, very interestingly, we can explain from this theory that, like I said, when you quickly cut out carbs, then it forces your body to switch, because the body needs energy somehow. It forces the body to churn through your fat, to metabolize that fat. And a byproduct of that is releasing the lipophilic toxins, and that's, I believe, the cause of keto flu. So I think that's really interesting. And once again, I said that they also see, when people track their ketone levels, a big spike in ketones during this process. And so it is interesting, though, that keto flu goes away, and sure enough, high ketone levels also go away. So when people track their ketone levels on a keto carnivore diet, those go down over time, and also the flu-like symptoms go down as well. So I'm arguing that high ketone levels should not be chased. You shouldn't chase this metric, because it's a warning sign that you are retoxifying your body by releasing lipophilic toxins. This is in the context of people dealing with obesity and rapid weight loss, but the same theory, the same idea applies in the context of cancer. It's well known that Thomas Seyfried has advocated for tracking the GKI. GKI is the glucose ketone index. It's basically a ratio between sort of glucose levels and ketone levels, and he wants that to be low. Basically, he says that if you have cancer, you should try to keep your GKI low. But the concern is that by keeping your GKI very low, it's a sign that you are aggressively attacking your fat tissue, releasing lipophilic toxins, which is then toxins that the cancer tissue has to deal with. And so you're actually adding extra toxic burden for your cancer tumors, and that can do one of two things. Number one is that it could basically kill some cancer tumors by pushing them over the edge, or kill some cancer cells by pushing them over the edge. But it could also lead to a kind of metastasis or growing of new cancer tumors, or basically pushing the cancer tumors to grow more, because then it's basically adding more stress to the cancer tumor. So in that sense, this keeping a very, very low GKI could be a kind of chemotherapy in a sense, because it's basically flooding the system with lipophilic toxins. Okay, so needless to say, I'm not a fan of tracking ketone levels. I am a fan of just trying to seek a low toxin diet, carnivore diet, and you don't need to try to maximize your ketone levels, because that's a warning sign that you are churning through your fat too fast for your body to handle. All right, thanks for listening. Have a great day.